So PhD candidate Pablo Silva was mentioned by Doug Raineman this morning. He's doing a PhD between Ireland and the US. And Bernadette O'Brien is a researcher at TEAGASC at the Animal and Grassland Research and Innovation Center. So it's an absolute privilege to have both of them with us here today. So I'll share presenter rights, I believe, with Dr. O'Brien first.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicholas. Good morning, all. It is morning at this stage here. This presentation, the title of the presentation is Characterization and Optimization of Automatic Milking System Options for Irish Dairy Farms. And this presentation will be given by myself, Bernadette O'Brien, and Pablo Silva. So, okay, just a quick word about our research centre. We work at TEAGASC, that is the Agricultural and Food Development Authority, and that is a national body that provides research advice and education to the dairy and food industry, or the agricultural and food industry. It's a research organisation catering for animal and grassland research, crops and environment, food and rural economy. And we have approximately 500 scientific and technical staff, and also about 140 students pursuing PhD programs. As you all know, I'm sure, Ireland is at the northwestern corner of Europe, and TEAGASC Moore Park then is at the southern tip of the country. We have a mild temperate climate with rainfall of about 1,500 millimetres, excellent grass growth. We grow about 10 tonnes of dry matter per hectare per year. The grazing season, or the growth season, is about 280 days, and to suit that we have a seasonal spring calving system. At the moment we have about 18,350 farms and about 1.45 million cows. And 90% of our milk is exported in the form of dairy products. The structure of our industry currently and going into 2020 is something like 81 cows on average per herd, and that herd producing 418,000 litres of milk. As regards AMS in Ireland, there is definitely increasing interest in automatic milking here. We have been working in the area with a few years now. At the moment, as far as we can determine, there are approximately up to 1,000 robots in the country, with about 70% on farms having 2 robots or more. Most of them would be 2 robots. The objective, I suppose, or the approach of the research here is twofold. First of all, we want to integrate automatic milking with the intensive grass-based system because we do have economic benefits from the pasture grazing, and we want to retain that with the robot. And secondly, we want to optimize milk output from the robot rather than from the individual cow. This would suit our system better, so that in that case we would have higher cow numbers with reduced milking frequency, and maximize the output from the robot itself as a unit. But in that situation we need very good cow control. I suppose the challenges in a grass-based system are a bit different from indoor systems. First of all, we have a seasonal limitation because we have all of the cows are in peak milk yield at the same time. Secondly, we want to achieve high utilisation of the robot in order to minimise the capital costs. And thirdly, then there's some time spent walking for the cows, and also when the cows come in, then they're waiting to be milked as well. This is the basis of the grass-based system and the way in which we incentivize the cows to move around the system and to come into the robot. Here we have a map of the farm, the research farm in Moore Park. It is divided into 3 sections, and the cows can enter section A, the red area, between 2 AM and 9 AM. The gates are open for section B between 9 AM and 5 PM, and the gates are open in section C from 5 PM until 2 AM. It's a 3-way grazing system, and a certain amount of feed is allocated, as portion of the daily feed of each cow is allocated within each of the 3 sections. Regarding the diet of the cow, generally speaking, we would be trying to maintain the concentrate level of the automatic milking cows at the same level as that of the conventional herd. So we would be feeding up to 400 kgs per cow per lactation. For the grass diet, we would be giving approximately 17.5 kilograms of dry matter per cow per day. And the farm would be walked weekly. The 3 grazing blocks are managed independently, and grass surpluses can be identified and removed as silage. We would do two allocations per day. 2 sections, B and C, would be allocated in the morning, and 1 allocation, then section A, would be allocated in the afternoon. We do not do any independent or specific collection of cows, but if cows are left in the paddocks, which very seldom happens, but if they are, we do collect them when we're doing the allocations. And that is the grazing scene. As regards specific studies then, we would like to, Pablo and myself would like to go through a few studies here with you. First of all, we're looking at the effect of reduced milking frequency on milk production and cow traffic in mid-lactation. Secondly, we will present some results on different milking frequencies and concentrate supplementation in late lactation. Then we have some work done also on labour and economics. Pablo will talk about the milking management trials, and finally we have a slide on our considered future work. So firstly, here looking at the examining the effect of reduced milking frequency on milk production and cow traffic in mid-lactation. This was a trial conducted for 12 weeks between May and August, and we had 64 cows in 2 groups. Basically, we had 2 milking frequencies. We had a milking frequency of 1.5 and milking frequency of 1.8. And what we see here is that when the milking frequency was reduced to 1.5, our milking interval was increased to 15.1 hours compared to 12.6. Our milk yield per visit was increased as well, which is as expected. The milk yield per day was not significantly different between the 2 milking frequencies. The duration, milking duration per day was reduced with the lower milking frequency, and the waiting time per day was reduced with the lower milking frequency, which again would be as expected. These are 2 graphs. The first one here indicating the milking frequency at 1.8 on average and 1.5. And the second graph shows the milk yield per cow per day. And you will see here that there is no significant difference between the 2 milking frequencies in terms of milk yield, except from maybe week 6 or 7, you gradually see a slight difference, an increase in difference between the 2 milking frequencies, but there still isn't a significant difference at the end of the trial. So that gave us confidence to move forward and indicated that maybe milking frequency, we can reduce milking frequency somewhat without suffering significant reductions in milk yield. Then this experiment looked at milking frequency and supplementation in late lactation, that is August to November, and we had 64 cows here in 2 groups. The milking frequencies used here were 1.9 and 1.3. And here in this case, when we see a reduction with the reduced milking frequency here, the milk yield was slightly lower than with the higher milking frequency. The milk yield per visit was significantly higher. The milking interval was also very much significantly higher. Milking duration per day was lower, and the waiting time per day was lower. With regard to concentrate supplementation then, we had 2 levels of concentration, concentrate 3 kgs per day and 0.8 kgs per day. With the very high concentrate of 3 kgs per day, the milk yield was increased significantly. The milk yield per visit was increased significantly. The milking interval was somewhat reduced. The milking duration per day was increased, and the waiting time per day and was not different across the two concentrate levels. So the points from these two trials: in mid-lactation, cows milking 1.8 and 1.5 times per day produced 19 and 18.4 kilograms of milk per cow per day, not significantly different. So therefore, there is a potential to reduce milking frequency. Reduced milking frequency, reduced waiting time, and that is potentially good because the cows are standing for less time on concrete. The reduced milking frequency also reduced milking duration per day and increased AMS free time. So therefore, we consider that that would permit more cows to be milked throughout the day and therefore give potential for larger herd sizes. In later lactation, the reduced milking frequency did reduce milk yield significantly and increased the milking interval to greater than 16 hours. But it did reduce milking duration and waiting time. A milk yield response to concentrate supplementation was also obtained. We also did some labour measurements on farms. We had some commercial farms outside, automatic milking farms outside, and we had some conventional farms, and we did measurements of labour on both. What we found was there was approximately a 36% reduction in the labour with the automatic milking, and most of that reduction was associated with the milking process. There was a slight increase in the time taken in the labour associated with the grassland management. That was because of 3 paddocks to manage instead of 1. But there was still a 36% reduction in labour. In looking then at the economics of the system in the Irish context, we did some economic comparisons. And we did 2 comparisons. First of all, with what would the scenario for a 70-cow medium-sized farm and the scenario for 140 cows on a large farm. In the medium farm, our comparisons were 1 automatic milking unit versus a 12-unit conventional milking system, both of medium specification and of high specification. And for the large farm situation, we had 2 automatic milking units versus a 20-unit conventional system of both medium specification and high specification. The medium specification machine, that was defined as it having auto feeders and ACRs as well in the 20-unit parlour. The high spec in both cases had milk meters, auto ID, feeding, drafting, automatic cluster movers and an auto washer. And this slide here shows the 10-year, the profit after a 10-year period for a herd size of 70 cows with automatic and conventional systems. So we have the profit on the left-hand vertical axis, and then we have the 3 systems here with the 3 shown by the 3 coloured bars. The first bar is the automatic milking system for the single unit. Secondly, we have the 12-unit medium spec conventional parlour, and thirdly, we have the 12-unit high spec conventional parlour. We see that the green bar in the middle, the 12-unit medium spec, has the highest profit, and that is because there was the lowest investment involved, low interest rates, depreciation, and low running costs. But of course, it had quite high labour costs. Alternatively, the red bar showing the automatic milking unit here, that had lower profit than the 12-unit medium spec because of the high investment, interest and depreciation. But the purple bar on the right-hand side, that is the 12-unit conventional high spec, had the lowest profit. The costs were similar to the automatic milking system, but the labour was much higher with the conventional system. We see the same trend here in this graph, and this shows the total net profit after a 10-year period for a herd size of 140 cows. So again, in this graph, the red bar shows the double-unit automatic milking system. The green bar shows the 20-unit conventional system of medium spec, and the purple bar shows the 20-unit conventional system with the high spec. And again, we see the medium spec 20 unit conventional system having the highest profit due to the lowest investment involved, lowest interest, etc., but of course very high labour costs. And the automatic milking system has the next highest profit, and the high spec conventional system with the lowest profit, again due to high costs and our high investment and high labour costs. And now, Pablo, we'll continue with the milking management slides.
Okay, yeah, so we decided to conduct a couple of milking management experiments, considering that improving milking efficiency in the cows in the robot can improve the overall performance of the robot and maybe drive profitability in the robot as well. And also, when we were looking at the cows in our herds from previous data, we saw that we had some very inefficient cows being milked in the robot. As you can see in the top graph, there were more than 10% of the cows had an average box time per cow of over 10 minutes, even close to 11 minutes for some, and which made some cows to be very inefficient, considering these are not high-yielding cows. The other situation that drove the research was when looking at different quarter milking durations, we saw that if we pick the two slowest milking quarters, the milking duration difference between these two was on average over 40 seconds. And a large proportion of them were even over 50 seconds, which gives us a great room for milking management practices and improve the system. And these trials were targeted at the end of milking, so at teat cup removal settings. And this particular milking robot does a teat cup removal setting based on a percentage of that quarter's average milk flow rate. So we tested 3 different settings that can be set by the user. The first of all is a more conservative one, 20%. So the teat cups are removed when the quarter flow rate is below a 20% of that quarter's average flow rate. Then there was an intermediate setting, which was a 30% one. And finally, a more aggressive, if you will, setting, which was a 50% one. All these settings had a limit of 0.5 kilos per minute, which meant that if at the time of teat cup removal, the milk flow rate of the quarter was above 0.5 kilos per minute, then the teat cups were not taken off the cow and the setting was recalculated later on. But with those 2 previous slides in mind, then our objectives were to evaluate the effect of these percentage-based teat cup removal settings on the duration of each cow's milking, the time that they spend in the box, milk production rate, and somatic cell counts. As I mentioned, we did 2 trials in 2 different years with 75 cows in peak lactation between May and June. And in the first trial, we compared the 3 settings that I mentioned to you before in all the quarters of the cow, so at the cow level. And then the following year, we compared the 30 and the 50% teat cup removal settings only targeted at the slowest milking quarter because of the differences that we were looking at before. And the results are shown here. At the cow level, we saw that when comparing the 30 and the 50% teat cup removal settings with the 20%, there were shorter milking durations, shorter box time, and there were no statistical differences between the milk production rate and the somatic cell count, expressed as the log SCC. Additionally, there were no differences between using a 30 or a 50% teat cup removal setting. I know these differences might seem quite small, but these are per milking or per visit. So considering that the robot performs roughly 140 milkings per day, there is potential for over 3 extra milkings per day in the robot, which means 1 extra cow in the system, which can impact the performance of the robot. Additionally, we think the limit, the 0.5 kilos per minute, might have impacted the magnitude of these effects, as well as the lack of effect between the 30 and the 50% settings. At the slow quarter level, using a 30 or a 50% teat cup removal setting had no impact on any of the variable studies, as you can see on the bottom table. Even though we were able to see that there are great differences in milking duration between the 2 slowest milking quarters, there might have been other things that played a role. For example, attachment order. Sometimes robot tend to make an attempt to attach the slowest milking quarters first, which could have masked this effect. But overall, we think that using this percentage-based teat carp removal setting is a bit more conservative than using an absolute milk flow rate setting. And additionally, using these settings create large variability in when the teat cups are removed, depending on the flow rate of the cows. So now we go to the statistics of previous years in the robot. Bernie?
Yes, thank you, Pablo. This slide just looks at the milk production performance for 2018 and 2019. It just gives you an idea of the levels of production that we have with the type of system that we have. And we normally operate in the past couple of years. Now we operate with approximately 85 cows in the herd. Last year in 2018 and also in 2017 we had 86 cows, and we had a 4-way grazing system there. In 2019 we have 84 cows we started with, and we have moved back to the 3-way system again. So they're the kind of levels, milk production levels and performance that we're getting. You can see the cell count there on the right hand side is quite good as well, and we're quite happy with the cell count levels there. As regards future, the focus for our future research, I suppose there is we would like to do for the coming year. We're putting together the proposal at the moment. For the coming year, part of the work of the coming 2 years, the one part of the work will be focused on the profile of automatic milking farmers. We haven't actually done any work in that area at the moment, and consequently we don't really know what is out there in the industry, and I think it could be very beneficial both to ourselves in here from the research point of view, but very much so for the milking companies and also for farmers out there that would be considering putting in robots, to see what other farmers are thinking, that are why they actually do end up putting in robots or not. So excuse me, the key questions that we'd like to get answers to, I mean, why some people do invest or why others do not invest. If they do invest, what are the expectations? Have the expectations been realized or not? What is the influence of technology on the farm and the farm life? Then looking at life influences, for example, what influence has the fact that the farmer himself wants to work off farm maybe, or the partner work off farm? Is labour an issue currently on the farm? What we are also quite interested in the implications for successors. For example, we would see here that quite a few people thinking of robots would be at the stage of life where they would be maybe they would see themselves as having 10 or 12 years more milking time left in their lifetime. And the question then, if they do put in a robot, then does that have implications for their successor? It might have negative implications for their successor, in that the successor might consider that they couldn't expand as well. On the other hand, it might have positive implications in that the successor would see that there's a positive labour scene on the farm, and that they could take off farm work as well. And that's, so we don't know about those issues. New entrants to dairying is also something we'd like to look at, because we find this year that about 2/3 of the new entrants to dairying nationally, about 2/3 of those are considering robots. So that is a significant number there. We would also, obviously, if we're doing that area of work, we would look at be examining the milking performance, drafting and management data as well from the existing robot farms. The second area of the part of the work then would be trial work here in the research farm. And what we would like to do here is look in more detail at the milking frequency and the concentrate input on the milk output throughout the lactation. Go right through the lactation from start to finish. Maybe do a factorial design experiment, and because we have looked at the very high cow numbers on the robot, I suppose, up as far as 86 cows, but we're also conscious of the other side of it, where the cow flow is very critical at the high cow number, and we have found that somebody needs to be with the herd or passing through the yard a lot in that situation. There are some people who would prefer maybe to work with a lower number of cows, and so we want to examine that scene as well. So we intend looking at 2 milking frequency settings in order to get milking frequencies of approximately 1.5, 1.6 and 2 maybe, and have a 3 kg difference then in meal throughout lactation, and do costings on that as well. We also want to focus on milk quality, maybe cell count on the commercial farms, but certainly the thermoduric bacteria scene we need to look at as well, and also to focus on behavior parameters of cows in the robot, again associated with maybe different milking frequencies and concentrate supplementation, to look at different behavior parameters of cows and that. So that is what we hope to do for the future. So thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, Pablo or myself can try to answer them.
Excellent. Thank you, Bernadette and Pablo. It's been absolutely fantastic. It's obvious and evident that you've been busy and working very hard, but it also seems that you will be very busy into the future too, with all those plans set up there. So there's, yes, a couple of questions that came through. The first one is for Pablo. Pablo, did you measure exact milk flow at the takeoff at each quarter in your takeoff experiment?
Unfortunately, we did not have that information at hand, although we calculated it afterwards as based on the average milk flow rate multiplied by the percentage of the teat cup removal setting. But we did not have that particular information from the robot.
And in that, just as a follow-up, and in that calculation, was there any difference?
There were differences, yeah. There were differences in the estimation at which each setting would take off the teat cups. However, there was large variability. So we saw a large spread between the cows in when the teat cups were removed with the different settings. So that could have led to the lack of differences between some of the settings.
Perfect. The other question is probably more for Bernadette. Bernadette, the question is around what things change in the typical Irish dairy farm when moving to robotics, being a typically grass-based system with very low input and 100% seasonal calving herds.
Okay. I suppose what we're always aware of is that there can be some system drift kind of thing, in that you know, it is difficult to maintain the very strict calving interval. I suppose, you know, there can be a bit of drift there, and we're always trying to keep on top of that. That is something that happens. Also, people tend to go in, use a bit more concentrate in that, more than they actually realize, I think. So those are two things that we try to keep a focus on. But otherwise, I think most people that do take on the robot here, they find that the grassland, they do have to put more focus on the grassland measurement, because otherwise the cows just won't move, you know, from one section to the other, and therefore won't come to the milking parlour. So they do have to, that is the critical thing for people taking on the robot. They have to do that. Most people that have taken on the robot, to our knowledge at the moment, you know, they are delighted with the reduction in the work and the absence of the, I suppose, time-bound work in the, you know, in the morning and evening.
And you've just tapped into the last question that came through. That reduction in labor, do they end up reducing total labor units, or do they reallocate that saving in labor units to other tasks on the farm?
I suppose without having done gone and individually interviewed each person about it, it's difficult to know. I mean, I think what is probably happening is rather than allocating to something, it is allocating to something else in a way. It just makes life easier for people. Whereas, I mean, we a lot of the time it's mentioned how you know, the person at home watching or with the robot at home and doing the farming at home, that person can now do a lot more tasks like associated with schools. You know, taking children to schools, collecting them from schools, minding children, doing other activities and all of that side of things, whereas another person would be employed part-time before for doing that task.
Excellent. Bernadette and Pablo, thank you very, very much for your time. As with all the speakers, probably we will have to bring a lot of you back, because just the amount of wealth of knowledge and information that you have is amazing. So thank you very much for your time, your knowledge and your expertise, and for sharing it with us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nico.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.